present. Okay, good evening and welcome to the Advisory Finance Committee meeting of May 9th, 2024 here in Memorial Hall and Town Hall. This is our 29th meeting of fiscal 2024. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting in person or via virtual means. In-person attendance will be at the location here posted, and it is possible that all members of the public body may attend remotely with in-person attendance consisting of members of the public. This meeting may be accessed remotely via the link in the posted agenda. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by in-person attendance or by accessing the meeting remotely as noted. Additionally, the meeting will be broadcast live in real time via Verizon Channel 28, Charter Channel 192, or via Westborough TV's online platform at westboroughTV.org and youtube.com/WestboroughTV. This meeting will be recorded and live streamed by Westborough TV. Okay, so it's been, I guess, about 6 weeks since town meeting or something like that, since we've all met. But we're getting back tonight. We'll have a chance to discuss that. And first we will start, if there's anybody here for public comment. I know Mr. Considine is interested. And okay, let's start with Joe.
Oh, so I get started?
And then we'll get to you next, Fred.
All right, and I have a handout that I'm going to refer to, and I made copies. I put them up, so that it will make it a lot more relevant to have the handout in front of you. Okay, 3, 4. Okay, just one more minute. Okay.
Hey, Joe,
Oh, so
I think
don't
I've
know
got the
what-
electronic version of this, right?
Yeah.
Is it the same? Is it
It's
the same?
thing,
You
yeah.
wanna-
Or actually, I updated it since what I've emailed.
Do you want to give it to Andrew, though, so he's...
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Give
I'll
it
look
to
at the
Andrew,
electronic
maybe you could
version.
share
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever. Okay, so I'll get right to it because I know that time is of
I know,
the
I can't.
essence. Walter, should I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I present, so as you consider developing financial tools to evaluate green initiatives, I ask that you consider the following. And what I've just handed out is a return on investment analysis on the millions spent a few years ago for solar panels and geothermal heating at Fales as part of the new building project. And this was prepared for me by school committee chair Durrett. He prepared it at my request, okay? And what he's, if you look at your hard copies, everything above the line there is what he provided, okay? It is very relevant to compare the net costs and benefits of this option versus the prior option without the solar panels and the geothermal heating. When he delivered it to me, and subsequently at the town meeting, added a follow-up school committee where I raised this again, he advocated the use of net present value, which he has in green on the upper side there. It's over. It's really 51 years. He said 50 years, but that's a very minor point. What I've added for your information is I used the numbers in his spreadsheet, and I calculated, I have it on the bottom here, the total investment to date, and so then I show where it break-even point is in 2048, which is 27 years after the project started. And then I also tried to compute the net present value for other time periods. Now, all of you that, I presume there's some people with finance background here on the finance committee, so you know what an NPV is, and you know you have to put an interest rate in there. And he didn't tell me which, so I just backed it out. And if you look at what I have for the 51 years, 5.588, it's as close as I could get to to the number he had, the 5595. And backing that out, I came to the interest rate that I had, the 4.19, and then I just recomputed the same thing, NPV for every 5 years, 5, 10, 15, and going up, okay? And so you can see that basically it says that break-even point, and it shows that the project has a negative net present value for the first 40 years. That is through the year 2065. But so I say, by presenting only either the 50 or 51 year NPV and not the break-even point or the NPV for lesser periods up to 40 years, and then vigorously defending it over my objection at town meeting and at school committee. And it was the school chair, and it was another gentleman on stage at the town
Joe.
meeting. Anyway, I'll get to it.
I would just talk to what you would like us to do in the future and less about other boards or people.
Okay,
because
it's a
they're
very
way out
short
of
thing.
our purview. And the only thing of value is how we would evaluate things in the future.
Okay, so I'll
Thanks.
just, my statement is, I'll stop ad hocing, I'll just read my rest of my statement. So I say that by presenting that, he deliberately misled the voting public. Town officials have a duty to present analyses to the public in a transparent and non-confusing manner. In this case, he persistently failed to do so. I argue as a concerned citizen that this was not a wise investment and hope that our town leaders will not bring forward such expensive but largely symbolic projects in the future. Remember, the alternative could have been to buy mostly green power from National Grid. I come here today because I was moved by the voter who spoke at town meeting of people having to move out of Westborough because their taxes have gone up much faster than neighboring towns over the past few years. I'm concerned by former middle-class voters who are relying on our food pantry because they can't afford groceries. Food pantry customers are up 85% from last year. Our taxes are now 14% higher than Southborough and 28% higher than Shrewsbury. As a remedy, I ask that Mr. Durrett publicly retract his statement, and I ask that this, and this is what the action from here is, I ask that this advisory...
Mr. Durrett has nothing to do with our committee.
Okay.
So
All
I
right,
would
well-
ask you again, don't talk about Mr. Durrett. Tell us what you
All right.
would like the
And that's my
Advisory Finance
conclusion.
Committee to understand or do in the future.
I am asking that the Advisory Finance Committee use an ROI analysis with break-even point to compare future green projects with the traditional, if less costly, alternative. If the 50-year NPV is presented to town, I ask that NPV over 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, et cetera, as I've done, be presented as well. That was my ask.
Perfect.
That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Is there any comment or discussion or?
I guess I would just point out, he did note in his thing that the bond rate was used was 3.5%. I don't know if the math works out that way, but that's what it says in the spreadsheet.
Yeah, so he is, certainly any of you could correct my numbers. I explained how I did it, so. But my main point here is that I just want.
Well, you asked if we had questions, not if you wanted to
Yeah, I'm
talk
sorry.
more.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all.
You have
Anybody else
questions?
have any
I just
questions?
had one quick one. What did you use for your capital cost? Is that evident on the spreadsheet here?
All of the capital costs and everything are his numbers.
But what is the capital cost associated with the geothermal and solar? Is it,
You'd have to ask that of him. That's all in the spreadsheet. He's got it here. Per year, he's got it, I believe he's got it amortized. He's got the finance cost
okay,
over the years. But it's his spreadsheet. All I did was compute the things below the line.
I can distribute to the group the Excel version of this, which would be
Yeah.
far more useful to most of you than.
okay, thank you.
So you're finance professionals. You all understand this, so I just ask you to.
Well, two of us are. And the rest of us are not finance professionals.
Okay.
The rest of us play financial.
We play on TV.
That said, I'm having a hard time making sense of the spreadsheet, so I'd like to see the actual Excel version, and then I
It's-
can look at the formulas and see what we're actually looking at.
Okay, certainly. And I will forward this to you, well, as an action.
If you have updates, yes, because
Yeah,
I
I think I
have the
added
last one,
the
I don't have the new one.
NPVs on what I originally sent. I
Okay.
didn't
You can
have the
send me
other
the newer
NPVs.
one, and I'll send that one.
So I'll send this to you
That's
within
fine.
a day, okay?
Sounds great.
All right, you can distribute it.
All right,
Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Thank you.
And thank you
And
all for
I don't know if you
the
said your name, but you're Joe Considine.
Oh,
for
I'm
the
sorry, yeah, I'm
record.
Joe Considine, I'm 10 Smith Street.
We do
Okay,
have someone
for the
doing
record.
minutes, so
Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
you.
wanted to capture
She'll
that.
appreciate
And
it.
I was remiss.
We're out of practice.
Okay.
We haven't met in a
Mr.
long time.
Savoy. Come on down.
Wilfred Savoy, 41 Chestnut Street. I want to share with you information on a
Thank you.
alternative budget process that I have shared with the town manager as well as the director of finance about 3 weeks ago. And this came up in
Thank
a
you.
couple of my presentations. I've got extras for other members if they want. So basically, this alternative would be revenue generated bottom up as opposed to expenditure down. We know that the town meeting, once the budget proposal is put before town meeting, there's a reluctancy to change that budget, to reduce it, if you will. And so any changes in expenditures of the town, any modifications, any limitations would have to be in place at the budget time. So what this process does, if you look at the second page in the diagram, the current process starts from the budget, and it asks for the departments to create their budgets, basically providing level services. The budget is presented. That is added to the capital improvements and non-borrowing warrant articles. And from that is subtracted the estimated revenues, and that's a conservative figure that's calculated. And then the difference between that is what's passed on to the taxpayer. The proposed change would be to start from the tax levy in establishing what would be considered a fair increase, level funding, whatever the financial officials decide in the town that taxpayers can afford. And then you build up from there. You would add the estimated non-tax levy revenue from a realistic standpoint, try to be as realistic as that revenue would be. Add that, and that total, with the levy established and the revenue estimated, would go toward the budget and the capital improvement projects. So it's a bottom-up, establishing the tax rate first, and then from that, building up to the budget. So I think at this point, the town is living beyond its means. If you look at statistics in terms of the median household income, around 13 out of 15, and I know you're going to be talking about the comparison towns tonight, I believe, but we rank 13th out of 15 in the median household income, where our budget is around 6th or 7th out of 15. So there's a mismatch there that we need to try to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And there's nobody else here. So we will move on to the next item, which is featuring our moderator, John Arnold, who gives us typically an annual town meeting debrief and discussion. And I will give the floor to you, John.
Hi, can you see the presentation either down here or up there? Okay. I've tried to formalize things a bit this year because I realized although I don't have lots of free time, I have more time than I used to, and I decided it would make me really actually try to summarize things if I formalized it, so I sent this along to you. So I'm sure you're all aware of this, but for people watching, the process that I've done pretty consistently with maybe a few breaks during peak COVID is that what I've tried to do after each annual town meeting is to have individual one-on-ones with each member of the Advisory Finance Committee. So I can hear feedback about the town meeting itself, feedback about how the committee's doing, whether people feel that the work on the committee is rewarding and how it's going, and then I can summarize those in an anonymous way and present them to you. So that's what I've done this year, and I'll thank each of you. I think this might be the earliest I've come back. The first time I may have been at the first meeting after town meeting and done that. So the goal of all this is for me to provide you some information that can help improve the committee's work, either in terms of process, communication, or anything else that comes up. I'll mention as an aside here that in parallel with this, as you may have noticed, the week after the annual town meeting, I held a series of 3 open moderators, sort of open office hours to hear about how the taxpayers and the voters thought town meeting went. And I mentioned that I was going to do that to the select board meeting that happened actually about a month ago tonight. I think it was right around April 8th or 9th. And I'm still, because I've been busy, I'm still gathering that. And I know some of your nine members' comments also touched on that. So that's not going to be in here directly. It might be indirectly. And what I will do is once that's done, I've promised the select board that I'll roll up what I heard to them, and I'll also come back to you if you're interested in doing that later this summer. So that's the way it worked. So first of all, I want to start off with some general themes just about how things went. First of all, I want to personally thank, and on behalf of the voters, thank all of you for the work that went into the annual town meeting. I think that the voters respected and were very welcoming of the work that went into the report. And although I forgot to call on Gene a few times to report out, we eventually worked our way through that. And my sense from the voters in general was that the committee did a good job. Perhaps just as importantly, I want you to know that the committee itself thought that Walter and Gene, you both did a great job of shepherding through, the crunch time that happens, right around January 1st all the way through March. So there was a strong consensus that everybody appreciated the work that you did in keeping things moving, keeping things civil, and just keeping things on track. So thank you. And also the good news is that the consensus of everyone I heard from feels that the committee's working very well together. As you probably know, because it's part of the interview process, when I make my decisions about who to appoint to the committee, based on experience I've had in the past, and we know the committee not just advises on finances, but advises on zoning bylaws, and everything else that comes before town meeting. And it's very important that I feel that the temperament and there's a cordiality and a respectfulness amongst the committee members, and everyone believed that everybody worked well together. And I wanted to emphasize a few points that I heard is that I think people are appreciative of the fact that there's different points of view and different levels of expertise in different topic areas, so that to help overcome the feeling of overwhelmingness that can happen when you're on the committee, that there's so much to learn and such a steep learning curve. So from a personal viewpoint, I was glad to hear that I had done a pretty good job of finding volunteers who had different points of view, and that everybody thought that they could lean on and that they could rely on the expertise and get questions answered and add some nuance to the conversation that each individual themselves might not have. And I will also mention that it was a pretty common comment that since the other members appreciate the expertise you each have, for all of you to feel free to continue to contribute that, especially as you learn more about the committee and how your expertise in an area reflects on the sometimes quirky and specific ways that towns do things. There was a general belief that the committee communicates and deliberates openly, fairly, and respectfully, and that's greatly appreciated. As I tell people who are interested in talking to me about the committee, and probably to each of you when I first talk to you about the committee, if the committees are really annoying and if it's all argumentative, it's very hard to get 9 people to volunteer to want to go to those meetings. So the only way to get 9 good people to come to these meetings is to get people who can openly, fairly, and respectfully work through these difficult issues and these difficult times. So you all in general show empathy towards one another, and that's greatly appreciated. And I think it's good that I think overwhelmingly everyone would like the committee to find a way to make a bigger impact, and we'll talk about that in the next few slides. And again, that's within the constraints of the committee's role. It's clearly understood that one of the most difficult aspects, I believe, of being on the Advisory Finance Committee is that most of you would like to change the world very quickly, and we all know when your main responsibility is making recommendations, that's a little tricky to do. It requires convincing a lot of people with coming at it from different points of view and from different what the big issues are to do that. But the fact that you all want to do it and are trying to find a way to do it, I think is very nice, and I'm glad of that. And then also, it doesn't really fit the colon in the sentence correctly, but I wanted to add, as we all know, a couple of years ago, there have been a couple of comments made at town meeting where people didn't want to speak on behalf of people who weren't at the meeting about why people were for or against things. And I think going back to a tradition, I think that we did a little bit when I was on the committee, but now going back to that where an emphasis was put on trying to reach fair and concise explanations of the pros and cons, and having that in the booklet not only sped town meeting up by people not having to ask the question explicitly, but also helped guide some of the conversation. So I wanted to mention that that was also appreciated, and from what I understand, it's probably something that should continue. So minor, but I put it here because we can get down into the weeds of the other things. One of the things that came up is we know there aren't many longtime members. Oh, Beth's here now. Beth may be the longest serving member on the
Currently.
committee. And so there is an importance, the difficulty of onboarding and coming up to speed is certainly one that's not to be sort of glossed over lightly. And of course, there's some things you can and can't do. But in terms of improving the camaraderie and also improving, in keeping all that, being respectful and understanding of what people, the different points of view people bring. One simple suggestion that was made by one of your colleagues was maybe to think of changing up the seating every once in a while. Don't always sit next to the same people. That way the comments that happen while you're waiting for the meetings to start or during some of the downtime, you don't just hear more stories from the same people. So that's, and it just came to my mind. Now, probably one of the most unusual corporate cultures I worked at back when I worked was with a company that prided itself on aggressively having a corporate culture is they used to move they didn't organize by what necessarily group you were in except for some very specific targeted people, but they used to have everybody move tables and move their cubicles or chairs or whatever we called the little desks every once in a while, especially so the customer service people would get to know everybody, and so that way you could rely on other people. And it reminds me of that, and that once you understand where everyone's coming from, both personally and financially, and where their points of view are, that could be good. So one thing to maybe think about is just every couple of times you come to a meeting, sit next to somebody else and have a little chit chat with them and get to know them. Another idea that came up, I think it may have come up a couple of times, is to think about in any of the downtime is whether there could be a more formal onboarding or mentorship for the new members especially. And so one idea would be to say that if somebody doesn't have time to be on the committee anymore and they'd like to step down, maybe they could be a resource for having a couple of meetings to onboard people about what to expect. I've made a note to myself, and I'll try to remember. I was going to find out if it would be okay, given the open meeting law, that if there's no deliberation about the substance of the committee, but just about how the committee works, that maybe a new member could get a volunteer to essentially, other than talking to me, and I sometimes point them to Walter or Jean, given their chair and vice chair, but maybe to have some sort of onboarding. So rather than flooding the inbox of 9 people, like, well, what does this mean or what does this do? Maybe just sort of having some sort of onboarding or mentorship. So maybe in some of your upcoming meetings, you could brainstorm about that, and I can work with you to find out, what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable, things like that. And then although I am and continue when I was working a strong proponent of you shouldn't care about where I'm doing my work, I do want to mention that although it's understood that hybrid's very useful and sometimes the circumstances don't allow for in-person communication, I had a number of comments that said they thought the conversation went more quickly and a little more deeply and less confusing when people attended. So I'm not one to, given the way I took a stand when I worked in an office, I think it's extremely valuable that hybrid meetings are allowed, and I think it's great that people who otherwise would not be able to be on this committee, if they can attend. But I would just encourage everyone to realize that sometimes if you can be here and if it's not too much of an imposition, it's a good thing. So I just wanted to mention that. And although I think that, as I said, the committee is very understanding, understands there have been circumstances where that's not been possible, and I would rather have the committee have a quorum and have the extra people online rather than not show up at all, which is the way it used to be prior to COVID. So now let's get into I just got a couple more slides. These are sort of the more meatier topics of where I've tried to roll things up. Oh, this would also probably be a good time to mention that if you feel that when I talk to you, you made a suggestion that I said I was going to roll up and you don't hear it, and if you don't mind it not being anonymous, feel free to say when I'm done, hey, you forgot about this one, and I'll go, oops. And if you want it to come anonymously, you can remind me later and I'll mention it at the committee. But I think I caught them I've got my notes printed out from my meetings with each one of you, and I've gone over them a number of times looking for themes without having to replay 9 different 45 or hour-long meetings with you. And these are in no particular order. They're the order that seem to fit on the slide and seem to go with the flow. One of the things that came up tangentially in some cases and more directly in others is that maybe on either on an annual basis, perhaps in the in one of the sort of lulls before the October special town meeting, or perhaps after the October special town meeting, before the real run-up to the annual town meeting, would be that perhaps the finance committee, just like the select board and some other committees, come up with goals for the year. So they could essentially, so these goals could be communicated to the select board, town manager, may describe what they are. And perhaps this has a little bit to do with what I think I just heard Mr. Savoy mention, is sort of his ideas, which would be the committee could discuss and also suggest ideas. It's not the first time I've heard that rather than being departmental, dollar sign, add it all up and then see what it is and figure it out. But, does the committee hope that there's a targeted percentage change in the next year's budget? Or is there a targeted average single household rate or whatever? Again, the committee's role is to make recommendations, but it may be worth discussing whether it would be more fair to all the people developing all these budgets if they knew what the expectation of this committee was and what would surprise them and what wouldn't, because that way it might be people would be more prepared for some of the questions that would come once the nitty-gritty comes out. So again, no specific ideas, but essentially the idea of having goals for what the committee is either looking for in terms of what they hope their recommendations will be, or just in terms of talking about how they want to approach the budget and things like that just beforehand. And that's going to lead into one of the sub-bullets of the next item, in terms of just trying to find ways for the committee to be a little less bound by the reactive nature of a warrant comes out, you react, or an article comes out, you react, a change comes, you react. So another theme that evolved was that I think everybody here cares enough and wants to make a difference and wants to also understand other points of view. So one of the themes that came up is there a way to find time to be more efficient or at information gathering, so the committee can spend more time in deliberation and the back and forth and understanding the pros and cons. And again, none of these are criticisms of how the committee has done anything. It's just a matter of some observations of how things might be done better. So sometimes just because there are hard deadlines on the committee, as you all know, and as I recall from when I was on the committee, sometimes there's a need to, you just listen, you get questions answered, and then you vote. And I think that there are a number of members on the committee who wish there was more time to exchange ideas and to explain the positions. So it's not I'm responding to my position based on the presentation I heard or the document I read, but more than 9 of you discussing back and forth what it goes, because just as we see at town meeting that occasionally someone will ask a question or come up with an idea and it will change the vote of the town meeting. It could be that on a committee of 9 people, if there was more in-depth discussion about why people feel the way they do, maybe there would be votes on the committee that would change too. So anyway, just again, something to maybe talk about and have a brainstorming session at some meeting between now and the next annual town meeting, to essentially focus more on, is there a way to do that? So the committee can sort of feel like it's more in control rather than just reacting to the circumstances presented to them. So that was another theme and idea that came up, and I think that one is crafted from things I heard from a number of you. And then last slide, some other aspirations or ideas or suggestions, and this is the one that drifts the most into the other presentation I'm working on about things I heard about town meeting, but this is more reflected on what I heard about town meeting from the 9 of you, which is I think everyone who prepares for the town meeting to the depth that the finance committee does wishes that there was a way to get more of the voters at town meeting to know more about what's going to be talked about and know some of the background of the projects and the recommendations. So there was a suggestion about, again, this could be part of the goal setting or part of the brainstorming, is are there ways that the finance committee in conjunction with me or the select board or all the other boards and committees, is there a way to encourage a better, deeper way of of planning what's shared not only amongst the committee but also with the voters before the town meeting. So, for instance, we all know that this year there was because of emergencies that happened, there was a run on the school roof. There were like 2 or 3 articles that were going to be school roofs, and to some people that begged the question of could the voters at large and you as the committee, is there a planned schedule of building maintenance so that we know where, I know there's a capital expense plan, and it comes out and it has like a 5-year or so purview of this is what we're expecting, but in term, there was I think a number of people at town meeting this year just expressed questions or had comments about, what is the plan for doing ongoing maintenance? Is it in the budget? Is it a capital expense? Where is it? And so one of the ideas that was floated was, if there is a building maintenance schedule or plan, it could be shared, and if there isn't, maybe it would be a nice suggestion to make to the town's management team to have that. And another thing that has come up, I've heard from other voters, but also heard bits and pieces of it from members of the committee, is that a lot of times there's a steep learning curve for all these projects, very large projects. For we have the community center, we've had schools in the past, and going into it, and we had the library, of course. Going into it, is there a shared set of decision-making criteria that essentially at the outset or as early on in the process as possible would say that this is how the people who need the capital project, this is how they would assess a positive outcome, not only of the cost but also what it provides and things like that. Again, if that's known earlier, then it could be that there wouldn't be a need to, on the fly, come up with a similar set of questions for what about this, or why did you do this? And so part of the design or the planning process of a project becoming public in its early stages could be not only this is what we need and this is why we need it, but this is how the different committees, whether it's a building committee or whether it's you, would like to assess the decision making along the way. So again, none of these are easy. Take a lot of long thought, but I think it's if nobody mentions them and if it just sits there and nobody will ever do anything, and I'd rather mention that these are things to think about. And if it turns out that the role of the Advisory Finance Committee isn't to do this, but it's just to wishfully say we wish this were done, maybe the people who come forward with the projects could do that. Again, I don't think these aren't something that's the committee's job to do, but it could be the committee's job to say it'll be a lot easier for us to know what we're going to recommend if you tell us what you think the decision-making criteria are, so then we can match it. Or early on, you could say, why is that a decision-making criteria? Why isn't it? On a similar note about sharing information not amongst the committee but also with voters, there's also I also heard about wouldn't it be great if there was a way to do outreach to get more people informed about the committee's work before town meeting or during it. So I think we all know that there's a number of voters that don't have time or don't know how to find information before the town meeting. And I think some people think that some of the questions that are asked could maybe not be asked if there were opportunities to get them asked earlier. And so some of the ideas that came up was, if there was like a tiny URL that didn't change with every version of the warrant as the draft warrant had, could there be a tiny URL for the upcoming warrant in a QR code or the URL, and what the status of the planned sort of march toward town meeting would be, could perhaps be put as an insert into like the February real estate tax bill, just to let people know about town meeting and let them know how to find out more information. And on one of those little sheets of paper that they sometimes put in for like the dog licenses or whatever, perhaps there could be one to just say, hey, there's going to be a town meeting, and then if you need to know more, point them to me, point them to the select board, point to you, or point them to the evolving draft of the town meeting, and that. So outreach, and I'm certainly willing to work with the committee and anyone else in town to do outreach, because it's part of what I try to do on my own, but I think there's strength in numbers, and if everybody was working together, we could perhaps leverage more and essentially try to capture some of the new people to town meeting that came up this year because of the citizens petitions and things like that got people's attention about town meeting and otherwise might have never cared before. I think if we could sort of harness that in the future, that would be a good thing, I think. And then one final item, and then I'll let the discussion go to you, and you can either take this under advisement and decide if you want to put it on future agendas or whatever. But one of the things that I hadn't really thought about, but that I think was brought up by one or two of you, was would it be better and make things go more smoothly in the crunch of meetings in January, February? Would it be better to start discussions about the budgets and any known projects earlier? For instance, although the budget may not be known up until right around New Year's, it's the early drafts are certainly known earlier. And certainly some of the big projects are talked about well before the warrant is closed. So perhaps one of the ideas that came up was maybe an earlier tri-board meeting before the town manager makes her recommendation would be, should there be a tri-board meeting like that in the earlier stages of the budget development, such that there could be some give and take about questions that would allow some minor tweaks to the budgets to be made, and at least the type of questions that are coming up could be known before the budget is, quote, finalized. And it might make not only a way to push to essentially distribute the meetings out a little bit more, but it also, going back to one of the previous ideas in the previous slide, if the committee wants to have a goal of this is what we're going to be looking at this year, it would be nice if that message could be given, and there could be some give and take about that earlier. And again, I know none of these are things that the committee can unilaterally do, but if there's a way to leverage the good communication and the good information sharing that is evolved from the tri-board meetings, one of the things to think about would just be, is there a way to, we always tell voters the best way to make a change is to get involved earlier in the process, and it could be the best way to make a change in terms of coming up and looking at the budgets and the big projects from different points of view would be for all the committees that have to review them to get involved earlier. Again, all going back to the less reactive, more proactively trying to achieve the goals of what the committee would like to achieve. So that's it for my prepared notes. And I will reiterate, none of this is easy. None of this is like, oh, here's flow chart A, B, and C, just do this. But I found this year's round of one-on-ones fascinating and enjoyable. I was pleased to hear that for the most part, people feel that the work is rewarding and want to make it more rewarding. And of course, 9 people wanting to make the work more rewarding means there's 9 different things of what does that mean. But if you don't talk about it, you don't figure it out. So I can either stand here or I can let you talk amongst yourselves. And I know it's discussions and works for meetings to come. But I wanted to, again, thank you. So thanks.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I do want to point out on your last point, we had a meeting this year on September 21st, which is
Right.
actually the kickoff of the budget season.
Okay,
with
yeah,
the
I guess
3
I'd forgotten
boards.
about that one, yeah.
And I don't know if
I might have
everybody-
misunderstood the person who made the comment, or maybe I misremembered.
Maybe they weren't on the board at the time. But
Yeah, okay.
it is very preliminary, and for me, it's always a little difficult because it's while we're in the midst of our prep for the fall town meeting.
Yeah.
And they want to kick off the budget for fiscal '25 then. But
Right, yeah, that's
we
all
do
going on
we
in
do have a
parallel, yeah.
meeting then at
Yeah.
least to start that.
It would almost be better if that meeting happened after fall town meeting,
Yeah. Well,
a little bit later, actually.
but they're
No,
they
I
want to
get-
go
no, I
off
get it.
and
They're
get
on
their
their
because they have to
schedule,
give all the whatever. I mean, we can talk to
Well,
Christie about
I had forgotten
moving that
so,
process
yeah,
back,
yeah,
but
yeah.
we could also have that meeting
Yeah.
maybe soon.
I guess
or
going
something.
back to
It's
the,
really
if the committee went into that early meeting with specific goals, maybe that would be the
That's
way
what
to
I
do
was
this.
thinking, right? Maybe it's how we use that time. So what are the as opposed
Yeah.
to showing up and letting the town manager provide us an update, if we went into that meeting and said, here's the sort of things that we're going to be asking about this year. Here's the sort of things we hope you have in mind through the budget process because we're going to be asking about. And so maybe it's not, because I think your point is right, like the timing is probably correct, and it's beginning of their budget process, which is when we have the potential to really influence that conversation. And so maybe it's us meeting prior to that meeting and saying, what do we collectively want to do differently this budget season, and take that into that meeting.
and have an opportunity more to participate than listen. Is
Right.
what I think you're
And
saying.
I mean, I think that's really mirrored in what a lot of people said
Yeah.
in general. Rather than us all showing up and letting people tell us stuff, let's do our work ahead of time and use this time for really engaging debate and deliberation. And take that same thing into that tri-board meeting. Rather than showing up and waiting for our update, let's go and say, here's our objectives as a committee,
That's a good idea.
and engage more
And I think
actively.
for us, we will then have to do that probably by August or something like that, so
Yeah.
that by the time we're knee-deep in the fall town meeting stuff, we don't have to also do
Right.
that at the same time.
So we're not
That
splitting our
makes sense,
priorities.
is to.
But the idea,
We
the
can start
conversation
discussing
about,
that in the next few months.
so that's what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
the conversation about what are our priorities and what are the questions we're gonna ask this year, we don't have to wait until
No.
we have a budget draft. We can
It's
say
better
right
not
now,
to.
here's the things that I'm questioning, right? Is it how we wanna see the return on our investment presented, right? Is it a change in how we want the budget process?
Right.
Whatever the case may be, we can have those conversations
Yep.
now.
Yep, yep.
You're right, so that we're not trying to do both at the same time.
Great. Okay, let's go around. Anybody have more comments?
I just, I assume you'll share this with us?
Yeah, I mailed
You're
it,
like,
I
okay.
mailed it right before dinner, so.
Oh, okay.
It's probably waiting for you if you haven't checked
I haven't
it.
had dinner yet, so I haven't checked.
As soon as I thought it was done, I sent it, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, so
I
you should
saw
have
it.
If not, Walter has.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I guess from the chair's perspective, I'd just like to echo those words. I think the committee worked very well together this year, and we certainly didn't agree on a lot of items, but we did it nicely and for the best interest of everybody. And I thought that was really a nice thing in this day and age.
Right.
And so I look forward to doing that again and see where we get.
I
and
think one of
certainly
the
try and improve things.
Things that, I
And,
noticed
I'll
was
just
that we
check with
really
Beth
did
or
represent,
Tom, if you have any.
sorry, yeah,
Beth,
I noticed,
Beth,
can you
did
hear me?
Beth does.
Beth, go ahead, if you're not muted.
I'm not muted, okay. So one of the things that I noticed, I just, all right, I
Somebody made a point
am,
about being remote, I don't know. There you go.
hi, can you
No,
hear
it
me
wasn't
now?
muted Before, I think it's a
It's a
sound
sound
system
system.
issue with Westborough TV.
We got a thumbs up from Tom, so I'm guessing
Tom,
Tom
you
can
hear
hear
that?
her.
Okay.
Okay, so
Or
Tom
maybe-
can hear me, but you
Two of
guys
them
can't
have a
probably.
conversation, but we're left out.
Maybe you can, maybe you can hear it on Zoom, but
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
I could turn
Okay.
on
Stand
my
by.
laptop real loud, but then it'd probably feedback.
He's working on it.
Okay, sorry, sign language. You type it into chat. Whiteboard, share notes,
Sound off.
chat. Hi, let me know. Type,
I hope she's not on like her
Into
third point
chat?
or something, because.
Yeah,
Yeah.
into chat.
in the chat, I can hear you. Beth says she could type in the chat, that would be.
I hope she's not gonna say, I don't have any questions.
All right, we're gonna keep the meeting going, and if we get sound, we'll have Beth talk in a bit. That's what she's suggesting, and it sounds like a
Could we look at the chat,
good idea.
see what's the question?
Well,
That's what she said
there's
in
no-
the chat.
Read the chat.
She
yeah.
said in the chat to move on, and we'll try and pick it up later. Okay, so, to that end, the next thing I have on the agenda is the AFC liaison reports and discussion. Starting first with the liaison and committee assignments. This is a good time of year that we're flipping around. If there were, I could probably share that. I think I have that up. Whether I can share it on Zoom or not, that could be a talent thing. Share screen, where is, it's this one, I think. Yeah, there we go.
Who's in there?
This would be a good time if there are groups you didn't want to work on or wanted to work on, we could move things around. Also, my understanding is Mr. Dolan, when a replacement is found, will be leaving the committee. So there will be some openings on the things he's doing as well. And I updated this sheet as best as I could to the newest things. So keep that in mind, that right now Tom is doing planning board, zoning board, insurance,
Conservation Committee.
and conservation. Now, if we just don't find somebody, then Tom will be on the committee for another year, I guess, right?
So no rush.
Tom, if you have
Well,
any
what's
issue
that
with that,
sign
just
language
speak
he's
up.
doing now? Anyway, it's just something to consider, and I think I emailed out the list, or if I haven't,
Yeah.
I can send it again. If there's anybody that right now knows they'd like to swap around or change, okay.
So just, from my perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm on the municipal building committee now, Affordable Housing Trust and wastewater treatment plant and water and sewer enterprise,
Yep.
which is DPW.
And DPW somewhere
yeah.
up here, yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't hurt my feelings to, have somebody else take the DPW water sewer.
Which is a big thing. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
because the building is a lot. Okay, so that's, but not wastewater, is that different?
I like wastewater.
Okay. So, water, sewer, and DPW are up for grabs. Just keep that in mind. And if you do DPW, you get a weekly report on snow and ice. That's just enthralling, so, which I get too. I'm the chair, I guess. But
Pretty sure I
it is
can't take
interesting,
that
although
one,
I gotta
so.
say, it
Given
wasn't,
how
it
little
wasn't
snow
an
we've had,
exciting
we should
snow
make
and
that
ice
monthly.
year, so.
We did a lot of repair work
We
this year.
do a lot of repair work. Okay. Thanks, Rod. Let me,
So I was thinking actually something else, but
Yeah.
I don't mind starting with DPW to begin with, because I think I can, Rod is still around and I can start chatting.
No, I'm still glad to chip in.
okay, so I gotta, where is the DPW one? Is that, was that listed
DPW is number
separately?
24.
24. Okay. So we can put down Ahuja there?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I did some sort of analysis of my own as well, and I did look at like just a count of, how many license, who has, like, Rod has 8 license, and discounting the chair, which chair has to do. I saw that Bloomberg has 5 and Dolan has 5, and I thought maybe, I could discuss about,
Yeah. Well, generally, when you first join, you're not gonna take on a
Yeah.
zillion things, because there's a lot of to learn
Learning
just
curve.
generally, but yeah, you're certainly welcome
Right.
to do more. And,
So you'll realize not all liaison positions are created equal.
Right, like being on the library building committee is like a big commitment.
I'm sure.
When I did IT, I think I talked to them once or something, right? I mean, that's not a big one, but capital committee is a large commitment for
Yep.
you, so.
yeah, I'm sure.
It's,
Recreation's kind of busy,
Yeah.
hopping.
and would you also be willing to do water and sewer, which are closely related to DPW? It's really the same conversation.
I mean, I would rely on Rod to discuss with Rod first and see what kind of discussions he
Okay,
has.
sure.
to
Why
figure
you
it out.
guys
Maybe next time we can come.
Talk
back.
online.
Yeah.
For now, we'll put you down for DPW, but you have to do snow and ice. That's, as far as I know, that is part of
Yeah.
DPW.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
even understand
Yeah.
why it's listed separately.
Yeah,
It's a separate budget, so maybe somebody did this by going through all the budgets
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
and just
I
listed it.
thought it was part of DPW.
Okay,
And if they start talking about wastewater, you're obligated to cover your ears.
yeah.
Because that's Rod. So as soon as they say
Standoff, yeah.
wastewater, you,
Believe me, the two of them don't talk, they're just learning that.
Oh, really? That does not surprise me.
Different.
They finally did it though, this Wednesday's
Yeah,
meeting. It was,
and since the last time we published this, exactly what Rod said has happened is the Golf Building Committee ended up just becoming part of the Municipal Building Committee, and Rod graciously agreed to do that, so this bottom one can actually kind of disappear because it's part and parcel,
Yep.
which means there's a lot to do there. Okay, very good. In other liaison reports, I have a few things to share. Do anybody else?
I can give a few.
Okay, you want to start?
Yeah, so, as Walter mentioned, the Golf Club Committee got merged into the Municipal Building Committee. We are out with our RFP, which was authorized by town meeting for a consultant to do the feasibility study. We expect to get those proposals in by the end of May and make a selection by middle of June, with the goal to have their work done by mid-September so we can present next steps to town meeting. So also on the Municipal Building Committee, not directly involved, but the Bay State Commons, I think the Select Board's pretty much taking the leadership role on that, but there is a small project anticipated in terms of getting ready for the rec department to use it, some paint and a little bit of repair work in the rec area. So that's supposed to happen this summer. And then also indirectly, the fire department is working to look at putting the dispatch center in the Harvey building. Originally, that was planned to be on Otis Street, and that didn't work out, so they've re-energized to take a look at that building. So that's the main three things for the Municipal Building Committee.
Can I ask a
Yep.
question? Because I heard something about hiring a OPM for the Bay State. Is that accurate?
Yep, they've
Owner's project.
They've
manager,
gone
sorry.
through a
Acronyming.
this was done through the Select Board, but they did go through a decision-making process. They've selected somebody, and I think they're in contract negotiations right now. Similarly, I think they're in the same status for the Harvey building dispatch center. There's an OPM that's been selected, being onboarded for that as well.
And you might have said it, but the dispatch center is still going to be a regional dispatch center,
Right
correct?
now, Grafton and Westborough.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think there was a concern over on the other property that was gonna hold it up for a couple of years or something before it was known, so.
Yeah. No, I remember hearing that. I wasn't sure.
Still Grafton,
Still-
Westborough, maybe somebody else will jump in, I don't know.
Right.
It wasn't there potentially multiple other communities and then one or two of the other
Shrewsbury at one
communities dropped
point
out or
was in-
something?
I think it started with 4, maybe
Okay.
5, but.
That's what I thought, and now we're
A
down
couple
to
didn't
just a
vote,
couple.
and then I think Hopkinton was in and then bailed at the last, I say last minute, it's been 6 months now. They bailed, I think their people in town had this panic of not having local people knowing their area or something. I don't know. It's the sense I got from the newspaper. But that's too bad. I really think regionalization of some of these services is a real way to cut costs in these tiny towns that we live in, instead of duplicating everything all over the place. And particularly something like 911 services where you use your cell phone, you first talk to the state anyway, you're not, it doesn't go directly there on the cell phone, so.
Well, and in mutual aid communities, right, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really an opportunity to lower overhead for everybody,
Yeah.
and it's a shame if there are other communities that are opting out.
Yeah.
So then on the DPW side, I think the big news is DPW has recommended a sewer connection moratorium that the Select Board approved. I think it came up pretty quick, caught a lot of people by surprise. There was a meeting Wednesday at the at the treatment plant with the representative from Westborough and Shrewsbury to talk about the capacity of the plant and what the impact is and what the goals are, and more to come.
Yeah, I was a little surprised we did the moratorium because it seemed like we were just on the verge of getting the information. Like the consultants hired and the data's been collected. It seemed like you could wait another 2 or 3 months and then do a moratorium if you need it or not, which I think you spoke to at the select board.
Yeah,
meeting, but,
I mean,
that was just, the timing seemed odd, but I don't know what motivated that timing particularly. Anyway, I guess we'll learn more over the next few months.
Yep.
Okay, any others? Okay, so from the finance team meeting, one really nice piece of news is it looks like they've successfully hired a town accountant, and the person will be starting in June. So, for all intents and purposes, starting next fiscal year, we should be able to get somebody, and I understand is someone very good with significant municipal experience. So, knock on wood that this all goes forward, but it sounds like it was, which I think is a very important thing. I think it's been difficult asking for lots more information when you know how overwhelmed that department's been with the shortages. So that's good. Also coming up is, as a reminder, we have to commit all ARPA funds by the end of 2024, have to be committed.
Calendar year, though, not fiscal year.
December 31st.
2024 for normal.
Yeah, right. And,
I, on the other hand, was worried about the June 30th.
Yeah, not June. And to that end, they're really pushing people on the ones that are open to get them completely under contract, because there's contingencies on a lot of them, and you don't want to lose that. And so we'll be back, because there's probably going to be at least some money that we will go through our process and get to discuss. So probably June, July, August kind of time frame. They're looking at the possibility of, it is possible that the interest that we've gained on ARPA, which we've been putting into, adding to the ARPA funds in essence, that amount of money doesn't necessarily have to be committed. So that might be enough that some of these, it's really hard to get things down to the exact dime, could still be, you could still fund something with it without, if the contingencies came back. Anyway, that's a topic of interest. In a total different direction, I'll come back to dashboard towns when we're talking about future draft agendas, but that was also discussed at that meeting. As Mr. Considine had brought up the way initiatives are looked at and how they're calculated, there was interest in from Pete Dumbeck from Sustainable Westborough, who's also on the Library Building Committee with me, that we look at kind of coming up with a more standardized, better process for evaluating these opportunities. Because clearly some things, if you look at them, might be easy. I mean, there's probably 10% of the people in the town who would never vote for a green thing, and 10% of the people who would always vote for the green things. But somewhere in between, you want to have good data. And some of these things are probably very easy to justify, and some are more complex. And so, we're starting to look at trade-offs in the library. You have to trade out. We have to replace a piece of equipment. What piece of equipment do you replace it with? And so what are the costs and what are the decisions? So Pete and I got together and I dragged Jean in so that I could have a professional finance person involved too. And we started exploring ways to do these things in a more consistent and we're hoping transparent manner, because you can still present how the data is calculated, I think, in a little more clear fashion, and also what the assumptions are, and how you're calculating things. I realize we kind of did that without asking this group, is that okay that we go off and do that, because we're sort of representing the AFC in a sense. So my point of bringing it up here was to sort of say, yeah, if you guys don't want us doing that, we won't, or but it seemed like it's an important area to explore, and that we will certainly, our idea is to come back with some ideas and then float them past school committee, our group obviously, and select board as ways. It sort of points back to what John was talking about having expectations of the kind of information you might get.
No, I mean, Pete was really sort of specifically talking about valuing, placing a value on the reduction in carbon. I mean, he was talking about the social cost of carbon and how to value that. So that would be a piece of a model of how to evaluate it. It would just go into, whether you looked at a break even or a net present value or, something like that. So there'll obviously be a lot more moving parts than that.
Yeah, the thing I discovered by just spending a couple hours on it is there are so many variables. It's because you can't know what the cost of gas or electricity is. You can't know the cost of, know when things will actually break or not break. And, do you keep something around? Well, it's got 5 more years on it, they'll tell you. But what does that mean? It might have an hour and a half left, or it could have 20 more years, So it's obviously tricky to make most of these calculations. I think it's easier if you maybe start with a brand new building, so there's no replacement thing. It's just a start scratch.
But I mean, for any of them, there are sort of accepted modeling
Yes.
methodologies, right?
And
I mean,
that's
you
what
use
we-
CPI to estimate your
Somewhat.
increase
But
in
for instance,
utility costs.
the social cost of carbon is estimated very differently by many different organizations,
like-
from the federal government, depending who's president, to the state, to other people that do the same. So, I mean, maybe we use the mass number, but at least whichever number you might use, you should be able to say you're using this number, and you consistently maybe use that number,
Well, I
and
think
not
you're right,
one for
right,
this
right.
project and one for that.
So to my point, there are industry norms you would use, right? You would use a CPI to estimate your utility costs.
Yeah.
And there are probably multiple options you could use for that cost. And to your point, I think you just have to say, okay, this is our preference. When you are building this model, here's the CPI you use for utility cost. Here's the index we want you to use, so that we're looking apples to apples. And we're consistently saying that this is what we consider to be the most relevant to our particular situation, right? Because we're a municipal government, we're located in Massachusetts, the Northeast is particularly expensive in certain areas. So here's the index that we would like to use for those calculations. But it's not necessarily reinventing the wheel, right? There's an index.
But the social cost of the social cost of carbon, it's not even in here right now. Right, so this is a new concept that Pete wants to introduce into these calculations. And as Walt says, depending upon, the administration, the cost that they use it varies greatly.
Using it all is gonna be to some extent controversial.
Absolutely.
Right.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
anybody can agree that we're going to need some sort of index to accelerate utility cost.
Right.
That's pretty straightforward. I know that my power will cost more in 10 years than it does now. We could argue all day over which is the correct index to use, right?
Right.
But we all know that we need to use an index for that. Social cost of carbon is one where you're going to get people that object to you
Right.
factoring it in to begin with. So you're
Absolutely.
right.
That's
And
okay,
that's somewhat political and not just,
But you could back it out and put it in, because in the
yeah.
end, the
So
voters
you
will
can
have to
present
vote
it
to
with or
vote.
without.
Right.
If you put in the numbers in a clear form,
Right.
someone can discount that. And the reality is, I mean, the return on investment is probably the wrong word, because you're buying equipment too, and when you buy a regular furnace, you don't look for it as a return on investment. I think you're trying to see is how much more is this gonna cost, and is it worth it? Probably. That's my guess.
I think there's also some much lower, easier to get, lower hanging fruit from this, that comes down to sort of things we can change the way we do our own business. So for example, our bookkeeping should be able to differentiate between when expenses are made for hybrid vehicles versus electrical vehicles versus gas vehicles. And you know what? We have real live time data. I have ideas how that's done, but leave it to the bean counters to do it the right way. Like how many, like not just the cost of our electricity, but how many watts of power are being used? Are we tracking that? And I think that the fact that we're not even tracking some of this stuff so that we could even put the live, real, not modeling data, but the real stuff we're doing here, I think that we don't have that curiosity built into what we're doing or what we could do, I think fairly easily. Yeah, it's hard to evaluate the choices we've made because it's hard to get the data.
So what Pete stressed was, first of all, we're working with Ben also, the town employee, Ben Bowers. But that the most important thing is to, if you do model something, is to follow it up every year and see how your model's doing so that you could improve your model in the future. Which is exactly what you're saying. We should be collecting data.
Exactly. So that's not modeling. Technically, that's not modeling.
But you
reintroducing
it. We had a model maybe of a hybrid police user in our mind, but you know maybe the tires are used more often than before, et cetera. So if you have the real data that's happening, you can sort of use that. And I think so. I think you're absolutely correct that. Collecting the data is an important part of any of these things. You know, measuring. And yeah, maybe there is some way that you know, we have a new town accountant now. Maybe we can have a separate account when the DPW fixes this kind of vehicle versus that, so you can see, or something.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that the systems will drive some of how we do this, but fundamentally, we're not even trying to do it, so we're not gonna try and find a way to try and measure it. And that's, from a mission standpoint, that's something that's easy to do.
Yeah. Good point. Okay. Does anybody, I guess I can give a quick library thing. We're just at the point now of meeting with the Historical Society and Disability Commission, because one of the core items is, can we get a variance on the front door and use the side door as the accessible entrance? And to that, you have to apply to the Massachusetts Disability Commission, and they like hearing from your local Disability Commission, as well as there are historic sort of preservation sort of reasons too. So those presentations have been made, and both boards have been supportive. I think the Disability Commission wants to ask for some sample language and some detailed language of what the thing was to actually vote on it. So that's sort of moving forward, and we're on the side and continuing forward with design work. But that's one of those things. Like for instance, the red slate on the roof is very it's somewhat unique. It's only, I guess, mainly comes from one part of New York State these days. And so, you know, replacing the red slate roof is maybe an issue. If it has to be red, does it have to be red? Or do we preserve them, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of good discussions there. Anyway.
Also, for anyone who doesn't know, our library director is leaving at the end of the year.
Yes. Well, the fiscal year.
Right, that's the end of the year to me.
Just clarifying it for the viewing audience.
My life revolves around that year end.
When is the cake?
Yes, our library director had an opportunity to be the head of the Mass Board of Library Commissioners.
Wow.
Mike recognizes the people that gave us the loan way back when. So hopefully she'll improve that process greatly, but I'm sure she'll do very well. It's an incredible opportunity for her, and the town will definitely miss her in that role, but she still will be a resident. I'm told. Okay. In terms of future draft agendas, the idea of discussing dashboard towns came up. Also at the finance team meeting, they've gotten similar feedback from people. You guys, I sent you Ed Bain's report. The dashboard towns, I guess the first thing the committee thought might be the most important thing is to really examine what we want to use it for. Because I think part of the problem with how we use it might be it isn't really, it isn't necessarily being used correctly all the time. Also, they need dashboard towns unrelated exactly to our set of dashboard towns when they negotiate with unions on contracts, right? You have to, if you're in the fire department, you have to have sort of towns that are proximate but also have similar fire departments. So I personally think it's going to be, it's very difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all dashboard. The one thing I will say is, from my discussions on this is, and from my recollection, the first set of dashboard towns, which was done right before Christie became town manager with Jim Malloy, it seems like that the finance team made that decision and just rolled it out. It wasn't a very public process with a lot of discussion. I think they did a good job at least establishing one, but it seems like it's mostly made up of negotiation amongst the different departments, school, fire, police, DPW, whatever, everybody trying to get a few towns that were similar to theirs, and that what you end up with is some of these weird combos because they have very good match to one department or another. And it is difficult. I don't know if you find another town that's, you know, on the crossroads of 495 and the Mass Pike where the fire department goes there, that has fire and ambulance, say, in their thing. I mean, Grafton, people like talking about, but Grafton's got a call fire department. So it's all really interesting, and in the end, I think you have to not compare the outputs. I think they focused a little heavily on the outputs and not the inputs, which is something that Ed and I also talked about, which is the, if you look at, our school grades are at this level, and you set that as comparable towns versus how much, you know, are you putting in per pupil or something like that. That's the input. That's the input. The output is the other thing. If you compare the output, you're gonna, it's almost self-fulfilling, I think, in the type of chart that you see today. Ed's willing to come in and talk to group. I don't know if you need more information than was, I mean, I think his paper explained it pretty well. I don't know that we need that, but my main point was, it seems like from comments I've heard that this group is interested in participating and exploring that. One thing I did mention to that group is I thought a possibility is, well, this group certainly doesn't have the wherewithal probably to generate the list, but that we might be the better group because we're more independent to sort of propose the list with input. But we'll see. It also depends on our interest and
I
our
do think
knowledge.
it's a great suggestion, right? I mean, even if some town employees actually prepared the data for us to compare, right, did that sort of legwork and gave us a list of possibilities, and we as a committee who are to some extent I mean, we're not impartial, we all live here and certainly have, but we're not advocating on behalf of one particular department or area, right? We might be a good group to really debate what should the criteria be, and how do these different towns fit that criteria, and how
Exactly.
make a recommendation. I
So-
think that's a great idea.
So to that end, I mean, you saw that Ed picked out, I don't know, 6 areas where he did his comparison. I guess I would throw out as a homework assignment for people to think about
Yeah.
what criteria do you think would be important in that selection?
Yeah.
And then we can maybe propose some of those things, or at least monitor the selections based on those criteria. Ed's thought was to, you hire a consultant that gets all this data and reports back to us, and we decide it. A little bit of conversation with Christie. I asked her at least to talk to, because she's the head of the town manager, whatever they call it, state group, mass, yeah. What are other towns done? What are other towns doing? Because I think, we're not the only town that wants to do comparisons, and try to find that out. We kicked around an idea of, do you have either two comparisons that you show both of them or something? Because you have these sort of geographic comparison as well, right? Our purely surrounding towns, like here, and then you have other reasons, like if you wanted to do the median income towns, well, then those are probably not necessarily the ones that are adjacent. It's an interesting conversation. In the end, I think you still got to make your decisions not on what other towns are probably doing, but what you think is best for your town. But it's I think the hard part is, right, if you get up and you just say, well, this is perfectly fine because we're here on this chart, that's not probably right anyway, no matter who the charts were. And as everybody says, it comes down to what services one particular town wants to have versus not have, or pay for it versus not.
Tom had a comment.
Tom!
I think you wrote in the chat.
I don't know if you, can you hear me? Or
Yep,
am
we
I
still
muted?
can't hear.
We'll
We'll have to
Tom
read
either.
his comments
Could you
in the
enact
chat.
it?
Let's see. Could we have multiple dashboards, one for the town? Yes, and that was the other thing.
We can't read
People
the
talked
comment. What
about,
is the
yeah, you
comment?
can't read his comments, but,
So you have to read it to us.
oh,
Because
sorry.
you're-
Sorry.
Yeah.
Put it on the record.
Oh, sorry. Tom Dolan says, could we have multiple dashboards, one for schools, another for fire, et cetera? Because I hinted, and that was another part that was sort of mentioned, because maybe it makes more sense in schools just to compare against schools.
Yeah,
Maybe it makes
it
sense.
has to. Like,
And that might make more sense than trying to do the one shoe fits all. And that's possible, but there could be also a big overlap in those
But
comparisons.
then you also have to look, so if we're looking at just schools and just fire, but we're not looking at our overall tax.
Right, see, that's.
Right, and I
But
think
there's-
that's the hard part. And so maybe it is, you have a school one and a general, and then, right, or maybe there's some hybrid, right? We have multiple.
but
I
so,
get the argument, but it's tough when you're talking about the total tax levy.
Yeah, when you get to the average single-family tax bill increase, it becomes a little, doesn't make sense if you split it up by all of them, unless you show all of those, I don't know.
Yeah.
so from the point of view of every constituency here has their own needs for these things. The school, the fire, they have like contractual, like actual money tied to their needs. Whereas we as a town have to try and feel like, how are we faring comparably to other people in other towns in similar situations, or something very similar, but they're their own distinct groups. Why would we have to throw them all in together into one blender and say, okay, they all have to, that makes
Right.
no sense.
I think it was a strategy because there was a concern of the so-called cherry picking, right? If
That's what we want our individual departments to be cherry picking. We want them to be able to do the best
Right,
thing for
but we
themselves, which is not,
you want representative comparisons, right?
sure, and there will be overlaps in the Venn diagram. They shouldn't be completely unique, but I want my fire department to look out for the fire department's best interests in the interests of the town. Or my school do the same thing.
But when I'm making decisions on my overall tax rate,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have to prioritize police, fire, and school all together. I'm not gonna say, well, I want the best of everything, tax rate be damned. I think I probably shouldn't swear on.
But I guess I'm not sure why you have to do that.
It's Westborough TV.
Well, I think that's where we are now, and I think that's the argument, is we need to start with what we're willing to increase our taxes, and then prioritize, not just have the best for each department, which is what I think we do now.
Right. And don't get me wrong, I want the best of all the things, but I also want to be able to afford the property taxes on my home. And I think that there's a balance, and I think that's where I think those comparison communities have to be a balance. And so to your point, it might be, we have this 6 that fire use, and we have this 6 that school use, and we have the 6 that police use, and then we have this 12
18.
that includes some, but maybe not even all of those that we use for the overall, right? Because, I don't know. Or maybe we have these 18 we use,
Yeah. So Beth
And
commented.
get
but
it,
the problem with
but-
having all the 18 is that means that all the ones that fire use also have to have the attributes of the school system that we want.
right?
That's the problem.
Right, I mean, I get it, and I get the challenge, but I don't think that we can analyze all of these things independently. I can't just look at what fire does, right? I made a joke the first time our fire chief came in and showed a budget presentation that included a picture of my house on fire. I most certainly want all of the best things for our fire department because my house was on fire.
It's not still on fire,
At
though,
that
right?
Thank God we got a great fire department. They went ahead and put that out. Right, but if I make all of these decisions based on, well, what if my house is on fire? But also I've got kids that go to school, so I want the best schools too, right? And I think we have to look at all of those things in concert. We have to look at all of those things together and make decisions based on sort of the overall package. And that's why I think those
Yeah.
comparison communities have to be as comparable as we can get in all aspects.
Certainly when you're comparing the tax levy, whether it's, the average or the total or what, whatever, then yeah, I absolutely agree, it's gotta meet everything. So that's the question, it's like, well, what are we using this comparison for? If we're using it to compare, average household taxes, then yeah, they have to meet, as close as we can to what we're aspiring to, or.
Okay, just to throw in, Beth says she thinks multiple dashboards will confuse a lot of people, which I think that is one advantage to not having multiple, is here's the set of towns we always compare. The problem is, at this point, the list we have is needs another look at, no matter what,
Yeah.
right? So,
I mean, I think in reality, you're always gonna need to periodically
Right.
update and review, and I
right.
think
And
that's
it's
just
been
the
a
way
long
we're at.
time. We can discuss this at a future meeting, and I would suggest that people think about the criteria, which I think is important, and also some strategies. And we'll have more information on that. John mentioned some other things maybe for future mentorship, and including member mentorship, or the idea of goals for us and strategies. So maybe we can digest that, and then we'll come up with a plan. We probably will have a few more meetings in the next couple of months just for doing either transfers or ARPA or some other reason, and we could plan on starting to look at some of those topics, as well as particularly the budget. One other just little homework thing is that everybody, I just realized this because mine's going to expire in August, but you have to redo your, what's it called,
Is it the conflict of interest or something like that?
conflict of interest every 2 years as a member. So if you've been on the board for more than 2 years, you may have to check mine. I started in the fall, so mine expires in this August. So I just want to remind everybody, you got to keep that current and bring a new copy down to the town clerk. So you should check your certificate, except for you, Tom, I guess. We'll let his fall.
Beth has another.
Beth, conflict of interest, open meeting law. It's not open meeting law, it's conflict of interest, yeah. The open meeting law you have to do when you start, but you don't have to, you can take it again if you want, but the conflict of interest you have to take every 2 years. Okay. Next up.
Hang on, could we
Yeah.
also propose other thoughts for
Oh, yeah, yeah,
items
that's the
on
point of
the
this
future
section.
meeting?
Yeah.
So one of the topics I'd like to cover is the financial data for this town. And you said we should talk about it after, and this is after. We have some really data savvy people here, looking at budgets and stuff. So I would love to see what we can do about opening getting access to that data. And frankly, I think it can be very similar to what already appears in our books, but let's hear from other folks in this room. I'd like to make that a data topic.
Yeah.
So, digital versions of what we see in the books, because hand typing all that stuff is it's brutal.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Actually, I was thinking of, so thanks for bringing it up. I thought, PDF is great, but since some of us also like to number crunch as well, having an Excel just makes the life easy. If possible, like the appropriation report as an example came as a PDF, but if it could come as an XLS as well, just helps in a little bit of number crunching better.
So I have
if that's
asked
possible.
before, and we weren't able to get it in Excel. I don't know if there's a reason why, but I've had to convert it to Excel because we haven't been able to get it in anything other than the PDF. I would love it in Excel because I also want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason a lot of people don't like sending things out, I mean, I guess you can edit a PDF, but nominally it's more of this is what I'm sending you, and you can't change the numbers in it and come back with it, I guess, differently.
We should talk to the finance committee though, because you could also, it's also, there's a lot of information in there that is lost when it's converted to a PDF.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
So the
formatting
question
of that
is
is really
whether,
difficult.
what we really need is our new town accountant here, because
Yeah.
we won't get any changes to any of this until that person is up and running and able to pump this stuff out of Munis.
Yeah.
I don't know I assume that Munis can pump into spreadsheets too, you'd think.
It just needs to be data files. Look
Yeah.
at the nerds in this room, it's just data. I mean,
Yeah.
like, they'll make an Excel.
If I can get it not in PDF, I can get it in.
Our
the
processes
They
shouldn't
could
be,
definitely-
shouldn't be
I'm sure they take an Excel
person.
file and convert it to PDF before
Yeah.
they send it out.
If they can output the data for all the different departments.
No, I'm
like-
saying
Right,
our process
it
shouldn't
definitely-
be like person dependent, like
Yeah.
we give it to Jane and she calculates, that's not the way the
Although I have no
process should run.
problem with that.
We should be able to get it in a format that.
It's not like she got
is-
kids.
We all know I'm building a spreadsheet with it anyway.
Right, that's okay.
And another topic?
Yep.
We're still trying to transition off topic. So, the conversation about budget setting, and I think this is a helpful way of looking at it, what was shared earlier by Mr. Savoy, but I think I have other ideas I want to bring to how we approach budgets, and specifically doing it in a way that's going to be mindful of coordinating with how we engage with the people Christie, et cetera, and all the folks that need to do with it. So I want to make sure that this is something we're talking about very early, because at a certain point, the chefs are already baking, and it's not it's not in their best interests to try and make major changes. So I'd like to hopefully have that conversation early.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, yeah, June makes sense, not September. Right.
True dat.
And, yeah, and I think it was interesting in John's comments, there wasn't a lot of that talked about town, but the biggest budget is the schools. 60-something, maybe 70% if you include all the insurance and everything else. So the thoughts have to be not just what you tell Christie, it has to be what how you work with the school department, because that's that alone this year would have put you at a pretty high increase.
And I think it was 2 years ago, we actually met with the school department as sort of one of these little get-togethers.
Yeah.
It
School
felt
board.
something, it was the
committee.
school board, yeah, it was a school committee, and something about it felt like it was being put together as something adversarial, and that's really not the intent at all. If we are gonna engage them, I would love to have it be in the interest of us understanding better what they're doing, what are their drivers, what are their strategies, this is not about.
Well, the attempt of
We're
that
pushing.
meeting was to get people to better
It was, but
understand
something
each
about-
other's, but I do
Yeah.
agree that there was.
It was a defensiveness that
There was a
wasn't intended.
defensiveness,
I don't think we intended to bring that to the moment.
So
I
I do
think
think
we
we have an
inspire that in
opportunity with a new finance director for the schools as well as a new superintendent starting, right? I know there are a ton of questions in the school budget. It's consistently an issue. Last year was my first year going through the process with them. And certainly I have questions that I didn't feel like were where the answers were provided in a way that I would have preferred. Again, I'm the nerdy accountant who wants to pick apart your spreadsheet, so like we all have to accept that I'm probably always gonna want more data. But I do think it's an opportunity, right? And so maybe we leverage that opportunity to talk with the new superintendent who is currently in the process of onboarding, and we talk with the new finance director and talk through how would we like to see data, right? Because that, for me, is really the question, right? It's all about data and how we want to see data and how we want to understand their process. And they go through Amber goes through a narrative process, and she explains their process, and the nerdy accountant in me again, doesn't want narrative, I want data. And maybe that's expectation setting with them and really walking through in June or in July how we're going to ask our questions so that their process can reflect that and we don't get information after the fact.
But Jane, I'd like to say I want narrative.
Well, and I don't think that
Now
it
you're
is.
loud.
I don't think it has to be one or the other, right? I mean, I
I
think you're right.
agree, but I wanted to say it out loud.
Could you whisper?
Might be able to turn it down.
That was out loud.
Maybe it's the room, which is.
No. It's on
But
that.
I think that the dynamic here has to be really, really
Sound
clear.
is
Is
working.
Yeah.
we have no say on how they do their money. So this is
Yep.
informative, and I think this might be part of what set the stage the wrong way for the last conversation. This is not a dictational effort from our point of view,
Yep.
because we have no say. They can do what they want. Frankly, they don't owe us anything. This is
Yep.
about how we can come to get this and sort of be
Yep.
educated, and you know, that's all
Right.
I was going to say.
I mean, I think that Mike and it was Kristen Vincent at the time was the chair, had hoped was that it was a more find out what are the important things to people kind of discussion. And some of that did happen. And some of it I think was more defensive oriented, I guess. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
And I remember actually, sorry.
But,
sorry, Beth, can you just say something so we can do a sound check here?
Yeah, hi.
Oh, that's much
Awesome.
better.
much better.
Just in case you didn't
Yeah,
know.
that's perfect.
Oh, him too.
Oh, look.
They're all working.
Just so
Try
you know,
together.
Beth, our reaction when he started talking earlier is because the volume on our end was incredibly high.
Yeah.
The loud and aloud.
Rock and roll concert loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very good.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one thing. I think one of the conversations we had before the previous town meeting was also about looking at the budgets presented in a different way, and that could be possibly another topic as well. Like, what does level services mean? Does it mean what you think to maintain the current service, or what it means to, let's say, not increase anything? What would be in terms of impact on the services? If, let's say, we don't raise anything, what does that mean the town is missing out on?
That's very much the second topic I went for there. So
Yeah.
thank you. That is
Yeah.
hand in hand to what my intent was for talking about how we look at the budgeting.
Right.
Okay,
Thank you.
don't hear others. All right, how about minutes approval, March 4th, March 11th, March 14th, March 23rd?
I have a question. John, yeah, John's still here. He might be the one to answer this. For March 11th, in a couple of the votes, we have Jane listed as abstaining. And I wondered if that should really be that she recused herself. And or if it matters.
That's,
Well, in case it does matter, I'd say editing it to say recusal rather than abstaining is probably more clear.
Okay, so I believe there's 2 instances in the March 11th.
I believe only one. There should only be one salary and wage, right? Because that would have been the only one.
Because we did it
from which-
separately, I think, in ICE maybe.
Enterprise or
There's
something?
a couple.
It was enterprise funds.
Oh.
Enterprise, there
Yeah,
were.
so I would have recused myself from any of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
wage-related
Yeah.
ones.
So
but
I
we-
wouldn't,
We didn't record the vote as an abstain,
we did record it as an abstain.
so then why?
And
wouldn't
it should
that
be a
the case?
recusal. I actually recused myself, not abstained.
But recusal is just like not being here. It's just
No,
nothing. Like,
there's
I-
a technical difference. Right, it's
Right,
taking
and I
yourself
did
out.
physically step away during that vote.
so is there a fourth thing that's 4-1-1? No.
Well, the minutes say she abstained, and,
Right.
Okay.
I,
and
right.
she didn't actually abstain, she didn't
I
say, I
actually,
abstained
well, that's it.
on a
I
roll call
actually
vote.
left during that vote.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I moved away from the
Right.
desk. I didn't
You
just,
left the
I did.
room. You did.
yep.
Okay, and that's only in March 11th?
That's the only
Yeah,
place
I
I
think
saw.
we
it.
voted those all in one
Yeah.
vote.
Okay, and so the amendment to March 11th is change where Jane abstained to recuse.
No, recused.
Okay, that's easy to do. Okay, anybody else with other issues, changes? Anybody feel a need to not vote these as a block? Good. Can you move?
Sure. I move to accept the March 4th, March 11th, March 14th, and March 23 minutes with the proposed edits to March 11th.
Okay, is there a second?
Bradley, second?
Okay. This is our first vote tonight, isn't it?
Yep.
All right, who starts these days? Ahuja. You're first.
Ahuja, yes.
Lundberg, yes.
Bradley, yes?
Brant, yes.
Clap, yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shafford, yes.
All right, so that's 9-0-0. No one abstaining, no one recusing, and no one voting no. Is there any other business in front of the meeting?
I'll
If
move
not,
to adjourn.
there you go. So
Shafford, second.
all right.
It's McMahon.
Ahuja, yes.
Lundberg, yes.
Bradley, yes?
Brant, yes.
Clap, yes.
Dolan, yes.
Leslie, yes.
McMahon, yes.
Shafford, yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you, Westborough TV.
Thank
Go
you,
Celtics.
Westborough TV, for allowing us to talk to adjourn.